Launching a business is exciting, but it's even better when you know it can make millions. Today's guest has a knack for turning brands into profit-making powerhouses. Not only did he grow his first business to $1 million in sales within the first year, but he consults with other businesses to break patterns of their steady sales so they can get to exponential growth. This is Ryan Atkinson, and you're listening to the UpFlip podcast, where we uncover how great businesses are built and the secrets to replicating their success. On today's episode, Adam Callanan, founder of Bottle Keeper and newly launched Penatane, shares his best-kept secrets on marketing a product's value, creating a cost-effective manufacturing process, and generating more sales online. It's his own method for generating millions, and he's here to share it with us. Adam, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on. Thank you so much for being here.
And I am thrilled to be here, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
It's going to be great because you're a serial entrepreneur. You were part of the founding team at American National Medical Management, which was acquired. You started Bottle Keeper, which you appeared on Shark Tank, and you secured a deal with Mark and Lorian. That was acquired. And now you're starting Penatane. I've got to ask, when did you know, you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Was that something that you're built up for? Or how did you know you're going to be an entrepreneur like this?
You know, I was not even remotely that kid that was leveraging all the kids in the neighborhood to go and sell rocks to strangers. And you hear those stories, and I was not that kid. I grew up wanting to be a doctor my entire life. From the age of 6, I started having these weird dreams about saving people on operating tables, which is very odd for a 6-year-old to have. But I built my entire life around medicine, around being a doctor. Actually we just moved out of a house recently, and I just found a book in a box that I used to use when I was 8-year-old. It was How to Read an EKG with a whole workbook in there of you're defining all the waves inside of an EKG. So that was the kid that I was. Going to college, I got a crazy science degree because I wanted to go to medical school. About halfway into college at the University of Arizona, I decided that I didn't want to go to medical school anymore, largely because I had every doctor that I'd ever worked with, which was a lot at that point. Not every doctor, obviously, but the vast majority of them say, don't do it. It's not worth it. It's not what you think it is. And, as I got halfway into college, I realized that the track that I wanted to take and what I wanted to do, I was going to be 35 years old, getting out of school and training with $500,000 in debt. I certainly was going to, if I had a family, it was going to be a struggle. My life was effectively going to start at 35. And that the older I got, the less attractive that got. So I translated that into business and went into an orthopedic device company that was pretty much a startup. I mean, it was working out of an apartment in Phoenix, Arizona. And I was the first outside salesperson to come in. It was a family basically that had started this company. And so that was my first foray into it. I mean, I did early on. I always was very interested in how things work. I had a grandfather that was very influential in that was the wizard, genius, master tinkerer that invented 1,000 things and never figured out how to get any of them to work. So we got to take things apart and put them back together a lot. And that was very foundational. And frankly, that's a lot of what science and math is really just knowing where you are, where you need to be, and you have to figure the stuff out in between.
Absolutely. And I feel like you figured out a ton of stuff in between because, like I said, you were a part of that American National Medical Management team, which was acquired. And you started Bottle Keeper, which I know people listening are going to be super enthusiastic to hear about because, like I said, you appeared on Shark Tank and we're going to dive into that story. But before we do that, can you tell us what led up to Bottle Keeper and your founding story? I've already listened to it. It's very cool, but I want to give the audience an idea of what started Bottle Keeper.
Yeah, I will clarify. A&M or American National, the company wasn't acquired. My position was acquired. That is a much longer story. That's not that fun. So
we move forward.
Point of clarification. Yeah, there's a lot of scar tissue there, probably for another podcast. With Bottle Keeper, that was in May of 2013 that I sold my position in that company. And my cousin Matt had a few months earlier invented this product sitting on the beach drinking a beer out of a red party cup. And he's the kind of maniac that will only drink a Corona at a specific temperature out of a bottle. That's, if it's not that, it's, it's just not good. So he's on a beach drinking out of a party cup. It's warm in 4 minutes and it's whatever it is gross. And he sees people using water bottles everywhere and just has this idea, why can't I cut one of those in half and pad it or put something inside of it and put a beer bottle inside of it? And so he, went and got an off-the-shelf water bottle, vice gripped it to a table, hacksawed it in half. I actually should have brought it. I have one in my office. We have the original prototype. It literally has these vice grip marks on it with a hacksaw in the middle of it. And he took neoprene koozie material and super glued it inside and it fit his Corona perfectly. The beer bottle stuck out of the top about an inch so you could drink directly from the bottle, but it kept the beer super cold and it protected the bottle. Glass in beaches is not it doesn't notoriously make a lot of sense. And so that happened in the fall of 2012. And going into 2013, I now was kind of looking for the next thing to do. I decided to go and start a venture fund, which is an awful idea because I hate raising money. So I'm very bad at it. And Matt, my cousin, kind of harassed me. And I say that very lovingly. We were super close. He was the best man at my wedding way before all that. And, finally was like, look, very admittedly, I was not convinced that this product was a thing. It just looked to me like a product that you would find at Spencer's Gifts for $7 and you'd give it as a white elephant gift. And that is fine. And that's a hobby if that's where you want to spend your time, but that's not a business. I mean, you got to sell 1 billion of those things to make any money doing that. And again, you have to be making money for it to be an actual business. So I agreed to come on with him to try it, to see what it was, but did so with really strict guardrails. And that was, we needed to be able to prove that we could get strangers to swipe their credit cards and click buy at a real price point before we went and contributed real time and some money to it. That was the first guardrail. The second guardrail is that if it worked, I never wanted to have employees. I had 80 people in multiple states, and it was, in orthopedic stuff, it was delivery vehicles and devices and warehouses, and it was so much stuff. It was so, from a fixed expense standpoint, it was so heavy, and that sucked. Honestly, it just sucked to operate. It wasn't fun. You couldn't get away from it. So those were sort of the guardrails we put in place with Bottle Keeper. So we proved out the first part of that with crowdfunding. There's a longer story to that, but we ultimately ended up at crowdfunding. And that was a really, really good way to get strangers from all over the country, or in our case, from 5 countries, to click buy at a real price point. That's where we got started. That was in the fall of 2013, and it sort of took off from there.
Yeah, I want to talk about this crowdfunding platform as well, because I believe you guys raised over 350% of what your actual goal was. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but I want to ask, once that happens and once you start actually getting people to buy and whatnot, what's going through your mind? Oh my gosh, I'm about to do this full time now? Or what was kind of going through your mind once you get people to buy? It's working.
Yeah. I didn't think that was going to happen. Now we got to do it. I mean, look, the reality is on one hand, I'm trying to start a venture capital fund, which is a very complicated, challenging thing to do unless you're expert at raising money, which again, I am not. And then this thing starts working and it's so simple. It's you buy it for X, you sell it for Y. And our margins were incredible because we tested a real price point. We did. We tested at a $20 per unit price point, and people were buying it at $20 per unit, pre-ordering it, months ahead of when they were actually going to get it. We got publicity stuff. There was an article in Gizmodo about it, and there was a lot of strategy behind all of that, but we did end up selling a lot more than was our minimum sort of, is this a thing or not a thing threshold.
Interesting. I want to get a little bit tactical here with this crowdfunding platform because it's obviously a great way, Kickstarters, there's a ton out there, how to actually do this successfully. If you could give advice to someone listening that wants to start their own business, and crowdfunding is a good way to do it, Kickstarter is a great way to do it, what are 1 or 2 things you would advise them to do to market it successfully on those types of platforms?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first very misunderstood component of doing both crowdfunding and really any early stage startup is that you don't need to go and pay a company or pay a consultant or pay this big infrastructure thing to help you do it right. The fancier it looks, you're supposed to be a mom and pop, starting up and scrounging, and it comes out and looks like a mega motion picture. I mean, there's a time and a place for that in a business, but it's probably not at the point of crowdfunding. And granted, it depends on what you're doing. If you're starting a cancer therapy company, you probably need that. We were starting a beer koozie company. So I literally shot it on a camera in my kitchen, our crowdfunding video, which you can still find. It was unfundable. So that's the first thing is you can do most of the things yourself. If there are some components you need help with, like video and, some content creation, absolutely do it, but be really, really careful about how you do it and where those expenses go. The other is platform does matter. At least it did then. And again, as a reminder, this is 2013. So that's more than a decade ago. The platforms have probably changed a lot. Then Kickstarter wouldn't let us do it because they were focused on art projects. And that was just where they were in their journey. They literally kicked us off the platform, which was amazing because what it forced me to do was leverage resource and network, and ended up at Fundable, where I turned out I actually knew the guy that started Fundable. His name's Will Schroeder, and they were amazingly helpful. They gave us access to all sorts of stuff that we probably, we could have had access to, but we would have had to pay for, like PR. And they had an internal person that had a PR list that obviously they want you to be successful. So they had put a bunch of tools and systems inside their business to help you be successful. And that worked really, really well for us. Even then, that was a really new crowdfunding platform. It wasn't no name by any stretch, but it certainly wasn't Kickstarter.
Interesting. And the reason you guys did the crowdfunding, just so I'm interpreting this correctly, is because of that first guardrail you had to actually proof of concept, essentially, that you can sell this at a real price point and that you can put a customer out there and people are going to put their credit card in to actually buy. Is that the main reason for the crowdfunding initially? And
those people, 100%. That was the only reason. And those people were not our family members. And this is a mistake first-time founders make all the time. They go and they ask their friends what they think about their idea. And that is worthless. I mean, it's nice. They're nice conversations to have. Ask your mom because it's going to make her feel included. And you want mom to feel included. That makes mom happy. Take what she says with a grain of salt. It doesn't mean anything. I was really, really adamant that we have to find a way to get complete strangers that don't know us. They don't know our backgrounds. They literally know nothing about us outside of this 1-minute video that they see, and that they could be compelled enough based on the imagery and the copy and the language to click buy. In this case, enter their credit card information online and click buy.
I just want to take a minute and ask you, our listeners, how we can help you get started on your entrepreneurial journey. What are you struggling with? Why haven't you started your own business or begun investing in real estate? I'd love to know what challenges you're facing and how our team at UpFlip can help. Email me directly at podcast@upflip.com, and I promise to read every single email. We'll get back to you guys on that, but email us with any questions that you have around entrepreneurship.
And so obviously enough people did this where they're swiping their credit card, clicking buy, because then you guys eventually decide, hey, let's go on Shark Tank here. What kind of led up to you guys deciding to go on Shark Tank? And can you walk us through that process? It's an amazing process to always hear about. So yeah, what led up to that?
Well, there was a lot of time in between those two things. So that's an important caveat. From a timeline standpoint, crowdfunding closed in the fall of 2013. Starting a company where a guardrail is you can't have employees means you have to do everything. And that you is me. I'll separate that with Matt was responsible for the back end of our business. So he was dealing with manufacturing. He was dealing with our finance, bookkeeping, payroll. There was no payroll. It was just he and I. We didn't make money for the first 2 years, but like dealing with that part of the business. And I was responsible for the front. So anything a customer interfaced with or touched. So our website, our copy, the images, the videos, the paid media, the email, like literally every single piece that you can think of, I built or wrote or did internally. Now, that sounds in hindsight like that's a fun fact to look back and, well, wow, that's crazy. But you do it in these tiny little pieces. And the reality is, if you learn how to do those things, you're so much better at the point that you have to hire somebody at being capable of hiring the right person, number one. And number two, being able to hold them accountable because you speak that language. You know how to do that thing, which years later became tremendously helpful. But then I had no idea how to do paid media. So I was shooting videos on a backpack, on a beach by my house in Southern California, putting them on Facebook and slinging spaghetti against the wall. And that was the marketing strategy. And over time, you iterate and iterate and iterate. And then in August or summer of 2014, Facebook launched their video ad platform. At least they launched it to the masses, and that everything changed. We went from like $2,000 a month to 20 to 60 to 100 to sell out a product in December. And that's where our massive growth came from. It's like in 2014, this is rough numbers. I don't remember exactly what it was, but we did like 150,000 in sales. In 2015, we did 1.8 million in sales. In 2016, we did 8 million in sales. And again, we still had no employees. We had no investors. It was just like running and gunning as fast as you could run and gun.
That all came because of the Facebook launching their video ad platform, where you're just probably shooting this on like an iPhone maybe and uploading and, like you said, hoping it sticks, and eventually it does stick to actually grow the company.
That's part of it. Yes, we were very lucky in hindsight that we unintentionally timed Facebook launching a massive new component in their system that happened to be what we needed to sell our product. You had to see it in action. You couldn't just see a picture of it because it looked like a water bottle. That could not have happened had the foundation not been in place for that scale to happen. And that's where this system of automations that we built really, really came into play. That's a huge part of it. I mean, you can dump all the money in the world and run as much money into your system as possible. If you don't have the processes in place to handle that kind of traffic and that kind of load, it will burn to the ground. So that was really, really important. But that gets us through 2016. Shark Tank reached out to us in 2015, I believe, because they saw a Facebook ad. Like they have production, people that go out and look for companies, and we were spending a boatload of money on Facebook. And so they saw a video ad and reached out. So we started the process in 2015, but weren't actually on the show until 2018 when we were a significantly larger company.
Oh my gosh. So that's a 3-year process to like that first initial conversation when they reached out to 2018. What are some of the things that like you go through in the process when you are going on Shark Tank?
So at the very beginning, it's a conversation of interest. And then again, this may have changed. This was almost a decade ago. You shoot like a mock pitch video. So you have to like slam together a mock pitch video knowing it's going to look like crap, but they just want an idea that you have some energy, which frankly was very difficult for me. I'm not a great on camera person generally. And you do that multiple times, and then you get assigned a production person or producer that basically is your point person and guiding you through the process. And there's a number of like cut points in the process where, if they don't like something or they have too much of this or too little of that, you could get cut. And we did, even in the first time, we made it all the way to the end. So part of the whole have no employees thing is I wanted to be able to run the company from anywhere in the world with the internet. So my wife and I were gone 4, 5, 6 months a year for the first 5 years of the business. We were traveling because we could. That was the whole point, was build your business around your life and not your life around your business. And the production team wasn't okay with me just flying back for the 1 week of production, which I didn't know, or I obviously would have planned around that. So they pushed us to the next year. The next year they had too many beer companies. So it just kind of got pushed. And ultimately, we didn't kind of fit into the slot where it all lined up until 2018. I mean, in the trailing 12 months leading up to airing, we did $11 million in sales. We were super profitable. Like, we were way too big to be on Shark Tank, which is frankly where like 50 of the 55 minutes of taping was about them beating the hell out of us for not needing to be there.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. When you're doing that much in revenue and you actually get to that date, are you thinking like, oh, I don't even know if we should be on here? Or like, what was going through your mind in that initial conversation?
It's like most things, probably all things in business, in particular early stage business, you look at what you have and you put pieces in place to mitigate the risk. So what are the risks associated to going on Shark Tank? They make you look like an idiot. Okay, well, that's an emotional, personal thing. Like, I don't care about that. They make the company look stupid. Like, okay, great. But I mean, so what? We're a tiny company. Early on, you film a show, an episode, and it doesn't go great and they end up not showing that episode. That's a risk. And you don't know that until a month out. They overtape, at least they tell you this, they overtape what they have space for. So it's like, really, what's the downside risk is that they, beat the hell out of us for not needing to be there. Like, we knew that was going to happen. So we planned for it. We had answers to the questions. We had things that we needed help with. So we looked at more risk of like, how do we ensure that they put our episode on TV? How do we absolutely give ourselves the highest probability that our episode is going to air? And in our case, we had Alex Rodriguez was a guest judge on our show. So we changed our opening. We didn't know that until maybe 3 or 4 weeks before taping. We didn't know that. So we completely redid, the producer, they'll let you do whatever you want, basically, like within some bounds. Like, we wanted to get the sharks out of their seats and like take their shoes off and come sit in our beach setting, but you couldn't because the camera angles would be all wonky. But otherwise, you could pretty much do whatever you want. So we completely redid our intro. We designed a thing that would have Alex Rodriguez throwing a ball. We just figured if we could get Alex Rodriguez throwing a baseball on TV, there is no possibility they're not going to play that episode.
Love that thinking.
So we designed this dumb little game, like a carnival game, where we had a bunch of bottle keepers with beer bottles in them, where you'd throw the ball at the bottle keepers and we'd show that the glass wouldn't break. So we just built that in the office out of plywood or whatever, an old milk crate. And that was the intro. And the reality is, not only obviously it aired because we did a great deal and that's fine, but like they used that in their promo reels.
Wow.
Which is what we thought would happen. So like we got so much extra exposure because of the fact they were literally using Alex Rodriguez throwing a ball on TV in all of their promotional stuff.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely love that thinking. It's honestly like, people say this all the time, like, while they zig, we zag. And I feel like you were thinking about like the whole thing about it is like, well, we want to make sure this air. How can we do that? Let's use Alex Rodriguez actually to be throwing a ball, because how could they not air that?
Yeah, that was the thesis.
Yeah. And from a financial perspective, how do you prepare before you go on Shark Tank? Are you like doing like flash, like note cards about like your margins and everything? You're like, how do you even prepare to be peppered by these questions, by these sharks, I should say?
There's definitely some of that. I mean, as you're running, from my perspective, if you're running the business, you probably know what those things are already.
Yeah.
And if you don't, you really should. But we absolutely put them down on note cards and memorized them and practiced them, because even, between the time you're rehearsing those things 6 weeks out, they're going to change a little bit between now and then. And it's like, you just have to have one number memorized. There was a lot of that. I think the other more dangerous parts of preparation revolve, particularly if you're a product company, which most companies that end up on Shark Tank are, is inventory. Like, how do you manage that? Because we taped in June, right before Father's Day, which was epic timing for us because that was our second biggest holiday of the year. So we were able to like open our episode with, well, in the last 12 months, we did $12 million in sales. In the last week, we did $1 million in sales, which was totally true. But it was like only like 3 other weeks the entire year could we have said that. But if you tape in June and you air in December, but you don't know that you're going to air in December until November, like, how do you deal with inventory?
Oh, man.
And you don't know. You might air in December. You might air in May, because the season starts in November and goes until May or June. So that's the biggest, to us, risk of the whole situation. And we were able to mitigate that by working with our manufacturer. We had a company, a sole source company in the US that was unbelievable. And we got to them over years of managing our own manufacturers in Asia, which was a nightmare. More Matt's nightmare than my nightmare, but we got to deal with some of that together. The company is called Direct Source or DirectTex, but they are a domestic company that we were effectively buying it from them. They had all their own facilities and people in Asia or China or Thailand or wherever, whatever it is you're trying to make. And so they agreed, because we had history with them, to make like 10 extra containers of product, which there were like 35,000 units in a container of product. And they would bring them into their warehouse in California and just hold them until we needed them. So, I mean, those sorts of creative, in hindsight, creative outside of the box things, made the biggest difference in the world, because we didn't have to go and, we were a very profitable company, but we didn't have $3 million of cash laying around to go buy 10 or 12 containers of product, right? So that's where a lot of the risk is in going on the show.
I like it. One more question, and then we're going to dive into profitability and like the metrics that matter and everything that you're doing at Pentane. You secured a deal with Mark and Lori. Like, how did you know, talk about the feeling of excitement once you guys were like, let's do a deal with those two? Obviously two they're all great sharks, but Mark in particular is my favorite. So I'm curious, what were those feelings once you guys actually did close the deal with them?
Yeah, you have to set the stage that we got there and they immediately beat the out of us. And Mark opened the episode with, "You're either the worst business people in the world or you don't need to be here." That's Mark Cuban. And then went out in minute 3. So our goal, we went in asking for $1 million for 5%, which is a lot for a Shark Tank company, probably not a lot given we were at a business, but we had to be realistic with what we were doing there. So you go into this massive, chaotic, there's no breaks, there's no take twos. It is literally an hour or so of just mayhem of 4 smart people and Alex Rodriguez asking you the same question 9,000 different ways, hoping for that aha. It is complete chaos. Aside from the time I accidentally delivered my son in the bathtub, different story. It is the most chaotic 45 minutes of my life. I've never been in that much of just an insane, condensed, wild situation. So looking back at it, Lori comes in, we have offers for multiple people. She comes in, then we're able to get Mark to come back in to do a co-deal with Lori. It was insane. It was absolutely insane. So at the end of that, it was literally in the closing, I think my comment was I've never needed a beer more in my life, which was absolutely true. It was incredible to go through this. They just beat the hell out of us for so long. And then to have it come all the way full circle and get exactly what we wanted with exactly who we wanted was epic.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel one, I didn't know it was an hour long that you're just getting peppered by these questions, but I feel it would be such a chaotic and intimidating environment, honestly, to be standing there exposed to all your financials and then them just hitting you with 1,000 different questions to actually see is this legit? Is this something we should invest in?
It was an amazing experience. It was really good for the company. We didn't end up doing the deal in real life, which is a whole nother story, but it was a really, really positive experience. I would highly recommend it to anybody who has the opportunity.
And let's talk about the positive experience you guys are doing over there at Pentane with helping companies be more profitable. Let's get a little bit more tactical in this episode with the time that we do have left here. So when you think about profitability for a company, obviously profitability is the metric that is most important. But what are some other important metrics companies should be considering when getting to profitability? What are some metrics they should be looking at?
Yeah, the number one thing that we see in particularly early stage and small businesses, let's say sub 20 million in revenue, the metric that gets out of control that makes it the most difficult to achieve profitability is your fixed expenses. These are expenses that exist whether or not you make $1. They are things like payroll, health insurance, office expenses. Pick one. These are the easiest things that get out of control because typically what happens is we start a company, we start to have a little bit of success, meaning revenue, and we think that's going to go on for forever. And although it generally doesn't, there's cycles to that. And so we add people to help facilitate growth. We add offices that we're going to grow into. And suddenly, we're spending $50,000 a month on payroll, health insurance, crazy benefit packages that I think are incredible and important for team members. We had an incredible benefit package at Bottle Keeper, but the revenue doesn't respond, or we don't know what the revenue needs to respond to in order to pay for those expenses. So that's the first thing, is your fixed expenses. The second thing is it's really, really important that you have a mathematical understanding of how to build your advertising budgets. Normally, we build our ad budgets looking at them exclusively as expenses, and we set them at what we are comfortable with or that what we feel is correct. And I cannot tell you how often Pentane is literally built to solve this problem. It's one of the things built inside Pentane. Can't tell you how often we see companies that are dramatically underspending on their ad budgets because they don't understand the amount of revenue their business needs to make to pay for their fixed expenses. Because they've added too many fixed expenses and they haven't figured out how to ramp their sales up enough to cover the cost of those fixed expenses, which is why they get a P&L, a month from now that says they're losing money. And they don't know it until they get that P&L, which is a disastrous situation. There are a lot of metrics. Contribution margin is the other one. That's the happy dollar metric. That's the most important metric, but that's a bit more complicated.
What are ways to always be managing your fixed expenses? Is it looking at the software you use and be are we using this to its full capacity? Or what are some ways to actually manage those fixed expenses besides just giving advice of keep it low?
Yeah, I know. So tactically speaking, I will try not to make this just an entire plug around Pentane, but it frankly is exactly what Pentane does, is what tends to be the most eye-opening moment that helps you to look at fixed expenses is to get an understanding of how much revenue the business needs to generate today with $0 in advertising to break even. And as you start spending advertising dollars, where does the revenue need to go? The result of which is your return on your ad spend, ROAS or MER, depending on how you want to splice that. See where your revenue needs to go in order to continue to get to break even or accomplish whatever net margin goal that you have. When you see that and you have the ability to adjust your fixed expenses up or down and see how much easier or harder those numbers get, that is a revelatory moment. That's the aha, got it. And then it's much, much easier to go to your P&L and find places to get more efficient because you know what that number needs to be. You can do that and say, if at $2,000 a day, we need to be at a 3 return on ad spend to get to break even. But if we reduce our fixed expenses by $10,000 a month, we might only need to be at $1,400 per day at a 3 return on ad spend, which is a lot easier, right? So now we know that there's that $10,000. We need to go find $10,000. It's so much easier to go and take the scalpel and go do that than, to your point, just say, do better, spend less. I think you have to be able to quantify the numbers.
Interesting. And when you say quantify the numbers, it really goes back to that return on ad spend is are we getting a 3x with this? Are we getting a negative ROAS with this? It's finding that and then being able to plug it back in to know what your break-even costs are and be able to be profitable.
Yeah, it's correct. And the reality is the more revenue that you drive, the lower the return on the ad spend needs to be to accomplish that goal. They're inversely related in every business on the planet. And the system shows you that. It says, if you spend this, you'll drive at a 20 return on ad spend is what you have to be to break even. But if you increase your ad spend, that return on ad spend will come down to 6. And if you increase it a little bit more, that ROAS will come down to 3.5. And so it's creating that quantifiable clarity around creating your ad budgets so that you can actually accomplish the goal with realistic return on ad spends.
I want to ask, what's an easy way for people to track that? If this is a Pentane plug, please do. But what's an easy way to track all these metrics that we're throwing out here?
Pentane. It is literally the reason the system exists. This is one of the reasons we got so big and so efficient. We got acquired as an 8-figure revenue business with 4 employees and no investors.
That's insane.
A lot of that is because we built internal systems on crazy spreadsheets that grew over the almost decade we operated the company that allowed us, we wrote a ton of math that allowed us to see what was happening in the business in real time and be able to guide us into creating advertising budgets. That was just us solving our own problems. And then the company got acquired. And a year later, I started consulting and realized that other companies had the same problem. They didn't know how to answer those questions. So I completely rebuilt a lot of that in spreadsheets in those companies and it changed them, materially changed them. Losing $100,000 a month in month 1 to making $40,000 a month in month 3 because they weren't spending enough on advertising. So it is, at that point, I was this has to be a software tool so we can get it to more people. But it is literally why it exists.
Yeah, it's just a natural plug-in once you start figuring that out. And what I really like about this advice too is a lot of times we'll have people on the podcast and it could be marketing and sales related. And a lot of the times it's know your numbers, know how many emails you need to send to book one meeting. And off of those booked meetings, know your close rate because then you can be predictable in revenue. And this is the same thing, but just in the finance realm instead of the sales and marketing realm.
100%. That's a really important metric to know if you're in a business booking meetings or you're in a business that's generating ARR, which Pentane is. Again, at the end of the day, if you want to be in a position where you're not dependent on investors, you have to be profitable. And I understand that it's hard. The math is complicated. And the whole purpose of the system is to simplify the complicated.
Are there businesses that you advise that you have looked into that have had crazy good profit margins, industries that people should consider when building a profitable business? From day one, I should say, yeah.
Yeah, you know what? some of the most profitable, healthy businesses are the least sexy. I mean, software companies generally have amazing margins, but they also have a lot of upfront capital costs. They have other things to them. Consumer product companies are really difficult. I can tell you I'm not going to do one of those again. Doesn't mean you shouldn't, the listeners shouldn't. You absolutely should. I learned an incredible amount. I wouldn't be doing this without that. And that was an amazing experience. It was really difficult. That's part of the deal. I have a friend that owns a company that does a very specialty organic fertilizer spray. That company LTV is $7,000.
Oh my gosh.
$7,000 of LTV. I mean, their margins are insane and it's not sexy. It's fertilizer. It's like specialty fertilizer for lawns in Montana. And it is the most beautiful, epic business ever that nobody will ever hear about. It's not going to be on the cover of a magazine. It's not going to get publicity, but it is an incredible business.
It reminds me of one of my teachers here in Clear Lake, Iowa. He taught, and on the side, he did chemical spraying to like disinfectant stuff. And he ended up actually quitting his teaching job to run this full time. And I just drove by like his building the other day with like 5 different trucks. And it's, again, one of those unsexy businesses that have crazy good margins. And I don't know what his LTV is, but I'm sure it's pretty darn high because he's the only one in North Iowa that does it.
Yeah. I mean, you get a customer like that and they don't leave ever. That's amazing. Really, really, really special companies.
Yeah. And especially when there's no competition in the area either. Like, what's the trade-off? Not doing it. But I want to know as well, because like you've been in a few different industries, like CPG and now like software here. But like, talk to me about like, how do you know when it's a good business idea? Because a lot of people, especially if they haven't launched a business yet, they're like, oh, I have 30,000 different ideas. I know I ran into this as well. But like, what are some things to look for when you know if you have a good business idea and something you should pursue? Kind of similar to like those guardrails you talked about earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I think at face value, at the very beginning, you need to have an idea that can generate enough gross margin for it to actually be a business. That's a mistake that I think a lot of people make. We'll have like a friend of a friend or a cousin or someone that wants to talk about an idea, which I'm always super happy to do. I love talking about this stuff. And they're like, I have a hat company. I want to make these hats. They're going to be incredible. Like, great. What's that going to cost? $35. Cool. What's that going to cost you to make? $15. Like, that's not a company. You were never going to pay to acquire a customer and ship it to the customer and provide service to the customer and do all the other things you need for the $20 contribution margin that is built into that before you spend anything. Or it's not contribution margin at that point. It's just gross margin. It's not going to work. I'm sorry. Unless you can sell somebody 10 hats at one time, that's not going to work. That's a huge thing. It's just, it has to have enough margin dollar in it for it to actually be a business. And then you have to test it and then listen to the customer. The customer will tell you what is working and not working.
What margins do you look for? Does it need to be above 60%, 70%, above 50%? Like, what are some good, benchmarks, of course. Yeah. What are some good ballparks to shoot for?
I think it depends on the value. I think if you're selling a product that's $1,000, I mean, a 50% gross margin is a $500 margin dollar situation. Like, you could probably acquire a customer for less than $500. Now, again, if it's a big thing, can you ship it? There's all this other stuff you have to build into that. But I think it's a little bit of a difficult question to answer because, again, even if that hat company, if they're going to sell a hat for $15 and they had a 95% gross margin, it's still not a company because there's not going to be enough margin dollar in it to actually operate the business.
Well, we are going to have some easier questions to answer here because we're going to move to our Fan Blitz questions, Adam. And these questions are submitted from our community. And guys, if you want to join in on world-class entrepreneurs like Adam, like other amazing entrepreneurs we have on the show, you guys can go to www.youtube.com/UpFlip and submit your questions there. But Adam, ready for our last 6 questions? Not 5, everyone. Last 6 questions here.
Absolutely.
Let's do number 1. What's the best way to patent your idea to keep someone from taking it?
Massive question. Incredibly big question. The best thing to do is talk to a real patent attorney. Do not go to your real estate attorney, your cousin, that's a whatever attorney. Like, intellectual property is extremely specialized. You have to talk to an intellectual property attorney. So step 1, don't make that mistake. Because if they do it wrong, which they will because they don't understand it, you're going to be in a world of hurt. And you're going to spend a lot of money doing it. So the second, which if you have a good patent attorney, they will tell you this, is to file a provisional patent. And I will caveat that I am not an attorney, but I have an incredible amount of domain expertise. We had 42 patents when we got acquired. We had an epic patent portfolio. So the first thing that you do is file a provisional patent, which is a placeholder patent. The way patents work, which is different than trademarks, they are first to file, not first to use. So that gets your place in line in the patent office, and they're cheap. You can file a provisional patent for a couple $1,000s. And then you go and see if that thing works and it's worth continue investing in from a business standpoint. If it is, you have 12 months to convert that provisional patent into a utility or other patent, which is a more expensive thing to do, but that's where you get that like real patent protection. I mean, honestly, we could spend 3 hours of podcast just talking IP strategy, but that's the starting point.
Awesome. I like it. Sounds like I'm also going to send my kid to be an IP lawyer. Sounds like there's some good money to be made there.
Attorneys are like doctors, are like accountants. Like there's really good ones and there's really bad ones. So you do need to be careful, but they do make a lot of money, but they're really important.
They know what they're doing. Number 2, what is the best marketing process that you found to work?
At Bottle Keeper, talking really, really directly to the customer and being extremely personal was really important. That was part of our brand. I'm sort of rebuilding a different version of that. Obviously, with Pentane, we're doing financial kind of chief revenue officer SaaS products. So the voice is a bit different, but I think being extremely personal and direct is important because there's just so much noise and we get so many emails and we get so much crap in our systems. The other, I think it's really, really important to not build the foundation of your revenue on paid media. I think there is a place for paid media, but I think it should be used as adding fuel to the engine once the engine is going and not the sole basis. And that was a mistake we made at Bottle Keeper. A massive mistake we made at Bottle Keeper. We were way too dependent on Facebook through the entirety of the business and couldn't figure out how to, outside of retail, how to really modify that.
Number 3, is there a process template that can be applied to businesses, or is every business different that will need a different template?
That's a really good question. I think that there probably is a path to follow with a clear understanding that it's going to be different than what you think it is, and it's going to change constantly. I think the way that I look at it is very scientifically, and that is just admittedly from my heavy science background. I do and test everything following a scientific method, which is not complicated. It's literally you have an idea, which is what you come up with, and you have an outcome that you want to test, and you limit the variables. So you're only testing one thing at a time so that things are influencing other things, and you create a process to test them and let the answer be the answer. Don't try to influence it based on your emotion. I think that's a critical, absolutely critical part of really all stages of a business, but really, really early on, I would say that's probably the closest thing to a template I could come up with.
I like it. Number 4, 3 more here. How do you transition from one job to another, like from contracting positions, doing something you enjoy, into a small business?
The only contracting position I've ever had was after Bottle Keeper got acquired. There were some companies that my wife and I had invested in that I went in and got under the hood and again realized that they really didn't understand how they made money. They were good, healthy businesses. They just didn't know how to pull the levers, right? So I rebuilt systems in there and it changed them. And then I got paid as a contractor to come and help turn around a $2 million a year e-commerce business that was in really bad shape. And again, I did the same thing. And granted, I was really intimately involved in helping them fix the P&L and do some different things. But the math and things inside of Pentane were implemented there and it completely changed their business. And now a year and a half later, they are crushing.
Wow.
Because they know how to make money. They know how their fixed expenses impact their business. They know how to set their ad budgets. They know what their margins need to be, and they can see it in real time, and they're doing unbelievably well. They're like the poster child of Pentane. In all honesty, that's the only time I've ever done that. And that was because I was advised by a wise old man post Bottle Keeper to not just go and start another company, like give it time, let it like calm down, relax, spend time in the woods, play with your kids. And 6 months later, I realized the hardest decision I had to make all day was what to have for breakfast. And that's bad. And that was the, let's go get brain working again. And I started doing consulting stuff. So it was a really brief period in time.
I love it. Sounds like a great opportunity. Number 2, did you genuinely sacrifice things to get the business where it needs to be?
Actually, no. Outside of capital, that is a strategic sacrifice. In Bottle Keeper was really built on this premise. Like before that, I was absolutely sacrificing. And that's why when I got out of it, I never wanted to do that again. I was sacrificing life and time and family and mental bandwidth and travel and the things that to me are what life is about. Right. So Bottle Keeper, we did that differently. I mean, I still worked a lot, but I did it from Africa and I did it from Asia and I did it from Europe. That was just the reality. And Pentane is the same. Like, I mean, now I have young kids. That is no question my priority. Family is my priority. This is secondary. And when you build like that from the beginning, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, Adam, I absolutely love that answer because I feel like as entrepreneurs, there's like a pressure when you ask those types of questions to be like, yeah, I sacrifice so much. I'm working 70 hours a week, like all of that stuff. And I really appreciate entrepreneurs who can like actually say publicly, like, no, I didn't actually sacrifice that much and kids are my priority over my business. So I applaud you for that one.
Yeah. And not to rip on those people. I know a lot of those people, but those are choices. That's a choice that you get to make. And if you're doing that and you don't want to be doing it, something is broken and you need to fix it. Take a step back and fix it. It takes time, but you can fix it.
Last fan blitz question for you here. This one probably is actually the biggest one here, but I have no money for marketing my health product. I'm 0% funded with Kickstarter after 10 days. I have great brand marketing and I've contacted 150 plus people on social media with no returns. What would you do if you were in my position?
Partnerships. Go find the company that their client is your client and modify your product in a way that is beneficial for that company as well as their client. Create a situation where that company wants your product in their situation, so they push it downstream to their client. That is literally exactly how I'm building Pentane. We're partnering with advertising agencies because they need the data in our system. So they're pushing it downstream into their e-commerce businesses, which is ultimately who our client is. So it's a win-win, everybody benefits situation. I would try to go replicate that through partnerships.
I like it. Run parallel to what they are doing. But Adam, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for this little partnership that we just made here. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. If people are like, oh my gosh, this Adam guy is incredible, I want to meet with them, I want to learn more about him, where can they find you and where can they connect with you?
LinkedIn is the main place. I mean, you can find us at pentane.com. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm spending a lot more time there than I historically have based on this business and my desire to help. So find me there.
This was a super fun episode with Adam. It was really cool to hear about his Shark Tank story and what that process looked like, and then also actually getting tactical into profitability. 3 quick takeaways for you. Number 1, find quantifiable clarity. Know your numbers, measure what matters. Know exactly what you guys are bringing in, what profits need to look like, etc. Number 2, going right off of that, find your break-even cost. Once you do find that break-even cost, you know what you need to do each month to be profitable, and knowing that. I think Adam talked about it a lot there, but like, it would be shocking to know how many companies actually don't know their average like break-even costs about being successful and how to keep your fixed expenses low. Number 3, know your ROAS, return on ad spend. Super valuable metric because that's how you're going to know which levers to pull to make sure you guys are breaking even and being profitable each month. If you enjoyed this episode, check out episode 137 with John Burdett on how to build $1 million business that you will love. This was a super fun episode to do with John. He has a ton of great takeaways on building that business that you will also love. Combine that with this episode, and next thing you know, you have a business that you love. Awesome. I love it. Adam, thank you so much for being here today.
That was awesome, Ryan. Thanks for having me.